with it, it's not supervised, they get caught, they're gonna get in trouble. This is okay now.
Yeah, I mean, if they have it and they intend to get it serialized, they won't get in trouble.
I just want you to.
Right,
Back
I'm
on,
saying is that there's no requirement right now.
Guys, we're back
just wanna make sure, we're back on, Senate Education 319, we're looking at draft 4.1 of S204. Part of our literacy bill, and Senator Hewlett, if you would just lead us through the sections that you want us to take a look at, that'd be great.
So there are some small changes in yellow that you can see. But, well, yeah, let's just go through. All right, so page 1 is the same.
Yeah.
Page 2 is the same. Page 3 is the same. 4,
And this goes back just to refocus us to the part that you were talking about before we went off around.
well, no, this part here on page 4 is, I mean, I've been trying to really balance this bill between, you know, my constituents, reading experts, and then the AOE and the folks on the ground doing the work. So it's a
Right.
balancing act. And it's hard to get it right. And so we're doing our best, but we did, a lot of folks were very, very passionate about calling out a particular way of teaching reading, which is harmful to kids.
And
And
would you just say what that is? Because I think we've all got emails about.
right, the 3 queuing system.
Three
Yes.
things.
So
Thank you.
I tried to find some language that would be, would mention it as something to not use and avoid without, you know, trying to be too prohibitive. So the language that you see now, and maybe Beth was gonna get to this, but public and approved independent schools shall not use instructional strategies that do not have an evidence base, such as 3 queuing systems. So it's just there as an example of a strategy that is not founded or based in evidence. So that was one change that was worked on. And I'll let Beth go through the smaller changes there, and then down further, each local school district and approved independent school shall engage local stakeholders to discuss the importance of reading and solicit suggestions for improving literacy and plans to increase reading proficiency. This takes out really specific language that was in the draft before around the local literacy plan. And again, this was a hard decision to make, but this just allows for more inclusivity between local school districts and approved independent schools. So I thought that was good.
So why was it hard? What's the challenge with it? Tell me.
Well, my sense is, and I could be wrong and the experts can weigh in, but my sense was that if you point specifically to the local reading plan, and I'm not sure if I'm getting the language exactly right, but that independent schools wouldn't have been included in that language because it's something that is necessary or required for public schools, but not independent schools. So by making this language a little bit less prescriptive means that everyone can be included.
Ms. St. James, would you add to that since you were the drafter? Tell us the before and after.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. So the language that you see in on page 5, subsection F.
Actually, it's page 4.
Subsection F.
Yeah, we're off by, for some reason, we're off by a page.
What draft are you working with?
4.1.
Okay, so am I.
Hmm.
Do you have it posted on your website?
I believe it is.
So you don't,
Want me to hand you my copy?
well, I'm sorry, I think I'm looking at what's posted is the same as what I have. So, subsection F, let's just go with subsections. I'm gonna make you all work. Subsection F Each local school district and approved independent school shall engage local stakeholders to discuss the importance of reading and solicit suggestions for improving literacy and plans to increase reading proficiency. That's language that's actually taken directly from the bill as introduced. The prior language read, each local school district and approved independent school shall engage local stakeholders through the needs assessment and asset mapping processes
Right.
when developing a local literacy plan to improve reading proficiency. So the needs assessment, asset mapping process, and local literacy plan are concepts that are specific to the public school district. So the theory behind this language change is public schools could still do that.
Yeah.
To fulfill subsection F. Approved independent schools are still required to engage stakeholders, but there's no specificity on how they do that.
I think for me, the big question, and maybe this Senator Buell can help, from stakeholders. Like, what does section F on the ground really look like? That's the part that's a little confusing to me. Because when I look at it, I think, oh, it means engaging businesses, the community, everybody in literacy.
I mean, I think the stakeholders are pretty prescribed through the needs assessment and asset mapping process, but this, because we take that
Out.
out of that,
Yeah.
I think it gives people leeway. It looks like Mr. Armoli wants to say something.
Yeah, just one second, but did you want to first? No, okay.
Gwen Carmoli, I'm the the chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy and a curriculum director, and we do needs assessment and mapping. Stakeholders is part of a requirement that we have when we have federal dollars. We have to do stakeholder engagement for various pieces. So as we develop plans, we have to do outreach, sometimes to specific subgroups or specific.
Please tell us who they are, like,
So,
who are the people that are?
We would reach out to homeless organizations, organizations that support poverty, organizations that support equity, business, it could be businesses. So you're trying to invite comment on as we develop plans, in this case, in the area of literacy, in order to develop and finalize our plans. We're trying to meet the needs of community
Got it.
and representatives, our students, various needs.
So this is just in terms of these folks will be engaged during the stakeholder process where if you're gathering information,
Correct.
that kind of thing. Okay,
But pre-planning and,
pre-planning, yeah,
and planning up until
Great.
you finalize.
great.
But to Senator Campion's question, do you foresee that this could cause confusion in districts?
No,
It's good.
I love when you said less prescriptive. I think
Okay,
that is
yeah.
extremely helpful.
Okay, great.
Beautiful. Anything else on 204 right now?
Yes,
Okay.
there was the next page on page 5 at the top. Kara, did you want to speak to that one?
I'm happy to speak to it if it's helpful or,
What was your suggestion?
yeah, I had
It's
reached
not
out.
highlighted, is it new?
Yeah, I
Okay.
highlighted it.
Right, you highlighted yours, which is great, but the rest of us.
You took
I don't
out
know,
a word.
out of my-
Right, seriously.
We took out a word.
I'm not ready to give that to her yet.
Yeah, of all the changes, this is probably one of the smaller ones, but I just flagged it for consideration.
Please.
Now it reads, each local school district and approved independent school shall engage local stakeholders. Oh my gosh,
So I have H,
that's not what where.
it begins each
I'm
supervisory.
sorry,
That's
yeah, I was reading highlighted language. Each supervisory union and approved independent school shall annually report in writing to the agency the following information and prior year performance by school. The earlier version said each supervisory union board and approved independent school. And what I had flagged was just that school boards aren't in possession of the data.
Yeah,
That's a
of
responsibility
the
of
union.
the superintendent, yeah.
Yeah.
So the word was removed and we are happy with the new version.
Great,
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
terrific. Ms. Carmoli, come on up. Are we good with all this? And then we'll move to, we're gonna have Gwen sit there. Andrew, you ready to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Andrew, have you seen 4.1? We just emailed it to you.
Yeah, I'm going through that right now.
Okay, so,
Not yet.
thanks, Mike. I think it's in our folders already.
Okay.
I appreciate bringing extra copies. Not going yet. I'm
Okay.
gonna go to Andrew first, and we're gonna go right over to you. Andrew, thoughts on 4.1?
Yeah, so the prompt kind of given to me was or actually I should reintroduce myself, right, since you went on break. So Andrew Proughton, I'm the Assistant Director of the Education Quality Division at the Agency of Education. So for when I was scheduled, it was to speak about how our data collection around teaching licenses in relation to this bill.
Yeah.
So I actually wasn't sure if there were specific questions. I have a couple different, thoughts depending on what would be most helpful for you on sort of the conversations we're having around this and the guidance that my office would be giving.
Yeah, so I think the question came up last week, and maybe it's been a little bit in the air in the State House, is there a connection to teacher licensure and this bill? Are we making that connection at all? And I'm looking at Senator St. James in the back. Ms. St. James, are we making that connection at all? Is there any connection to teacher licensure in this?
Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. S303 is a very large connection
Yeah,
to teacher licensing.
yes, but
This is the connection to teacher licensing is in that you are requiring them to do something.
Yeah.
In the use of their license.
yeah,
But I am not seeing anything in S204 that I would say is a licensing requirement.
and I think that's,
Oh,
please, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the subsection G on page 5 on what is posted on your website. The subsection G does say, the agency shall provide professional learning opportunities for educators with evidence-based reading instructional practices that address the areas of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension.
Yeah.
That is essentially what S303 is doing.
Right.
I'm just scrolling here. I don't see anything in here that's tied directly to licensing other than subsection G.
Yeah, no, and I think that was one of the questions, and that's why we had you come in, Andrew. Unless you have other big concerns about this bill at this point, I don't know. We need you. I mean, that's where we are at this point. We are looking for big major concerns, things that are going to come up on the floor, etc. Anything from your end?
Not from a licensing perspective. I know that in earlier draft, it looks like it's not in there anymore, was a recommendation around reading specialists, but I don't think that's a concern. I'll send this version to the Emilys and folks within Student Pathways to make sure they have eyes on it and can relay any concerns from that team.
Right, because I think we're getting close. We're gonna hear from Ms. Carmoli, who's gonna probably again there's a few suggestions. The independent school folks are coming in tomorrow, and then I'm hoping we are done. Please, Ms. Carmoli.
All right.
Thanks. See you,
Thank you.
Andrew.
Thank you. I only have a few comments, and really I'm here for any questions as you're in the final phases of moving this. You have
Great.
two different literacy bills that
Yeah.
I know that you're working through. My first comment is thank you so much. This is huge work that you're doing. And you've created a lot of energy and resource in literacy across the state by the use of the Act 28, the funds at the Agency of Education to create resources to have the professional learning modules created to create the Advisory Council on Literacy. And it's a collective, and I would say pretty unifying energy around improving literacy. That's really exciting. So thank you so much for that. Last time I was here, you gave me an A. I'm gonna give myself a C+ starting, but I'm.
Okay, well, let's see what's good.
C+ is because I was in a really big hurry. I wasn't sure I was gonna make it today, so I threw together a testimony and I'm noticing typos And that's gonna drive me crazy, so I promise I'll get you a cleaned up copy soon.
No, we won't.
Um,
Morgan did though.
there's areas to consider. One you addressed, which was about that data collection from school board striking the word
Right,
board.
good.
Thank you. Another one I think you've addressed, and Senator Bullock, I think you were really describing this, as you've been doing that balancing act. You've been taking, hope and a lot of input and then requirement and trying to work that together. And I think you've done a really nice job.
Amazing,
So the-
really great job.
My favorite policy.
Yes,
Secret
thank
career.
you. So when, that point about what we're trying to do in this bill is do a universal literacy screening that includes the screening for dyslexia characteristics.
Yeah.
It is not necessarily a single dyslexia screener, nor is it the identification. And you've done a really nice job of doing that, which then says if a
Which I
student-
would add is complicated.
I know, it
So she
is.
really has, and it is much more complicated than I ever realized, so thanks.
Yeah. And then there's follow-up screening or follow-up assessment that happens if a student is not showing up on grade level or at the benchmark on those characteristics and on the grade level. And then systems of support. So all of that work that you're doing is really helping us align with existing requirements we have in MTSS Act 173 and on evidence-based practices, which is part of our practices. Thank you. My broad recommendation is if there are additional requests, think about broad policy and then resources and recommendations that come from the agency instead of trying to stuff everything into the bill. Massachusetts would be my example. They have a very short policy. They have some of the leading assessment results on NAEP in grade 4 and in grade 8. They have been number 1 or in the top 3 for about a decade. They are very strong. They have a very short policy, and then they have excellent resources on literacy instruction and on dyslexia, resources with dyslexia. So when I'm often looking for resources, I'm usually looking at, so just think broad. If as extra stuff keeps coming this way, think about how you could have, the less is more in this case, and then how we could provide the specifics in the resources at the agency.
Okay.
Do you want me to do S3, S3?
No,
No,
yeah.
okay.
Can I ask a couple?
Yeah, please.
Of course,
jump right in.
So thank you so much, Glenn. I really appreciate your help with this, all along the whole journey. Broad help at this point is giving me heart palpitations.
Okay,
'cause
I won't
feel
go too
like
broad.
we need very, very
Okay.
specific guidance. So if we could just look at your second bullet point.
Okay, yes.
Is there specific language that you would like us to adopt that isn't here? And if so, where would it, is that fair?
I was working at 3.1, so I'm not on 4.1, and I do not have either of the copies with me. There was, at one point it said universal dyslexia screening.
We took
We
that
took
out.
Okay, perfect. So then I think it's been addressed.
Okay, super. And then the third, I mean, I think I hear what you're saying is like, instead of this being like an 8-page bill, maybe it should be like 2 or 3 pages.
Well, when you get close to the end, sometimes people bring a lot of new ideas.
Oh,
As that comes to, I think you're on a good path
Great.
and hold the course. is what I
Fantastic,
recommend.
Okay.
great.
I
So
would
we've
agree with
taken
that.
care of all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Ms. Carmoli? Great. So 303, just want to give us a little something?
Okay, so there I was building off the testimony that Vermont Superintendent's Association and Vermont Principals Association did. And the Advisory Council on Literacy is very supportive of professional learning for the educators who are providing literacy and for others as well. But to require the full 46 hours of training for all of the educators may not be it may not be the best use of their time. And what I would say from a curriculum point of view, we have a lot of professional learning that we have to provide.
Yeah.
Literacy, mathematics, multi-tiered systems of support, social emotional learning, equity, all of those are requirements. And so how to fit all of this in is part of the Jenga puzzle that we're
Mhm.
doing. So if there's a way to consider, could you narrow that? So perhaps say elementary and any teacher of literacy or something to that effect would do the full set of literacy modules or professional learning. And then maybe secondary grades 6 through 12 might do, or the teachers who are not doing literacy might only do, 4 hours.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think it'd be hard for us to make those decisions. We have to look at everything, we have to go through every single module and
Right.
to say, hey, this is appropriate for this. But I have no issue with giving the agency flexibility
Yes.
on this. And having them, just like we're having them decide, if a 3-credit course at
Right.
Champlain qualifies, it gets them up to speed. I think that's okay. Yeah, Ms. St. James, please.
Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So there was language in one of the original drafts that directed AOE to make recommendations to the standards board regarding specific continuing education requirements by endorsement. And I had some concern about the way the language was worded. I had some concern about jurisdiction regarding licensing requirements, living with the standards board and AOE. So all of that to say, there was some language in previous drafts. AOE asked me to pull that language because they have the ability to do that,
Okay.
to make recommendations. And I would obviously encourage you to hear from the agency, but I believe that it is their plan to make recommendations related to literacy continuing education, and tie those recommendations to endorsements. What that looks like beyond that broad statement, I don't know.
I think,
So right now, if the agency, once this is passed, signed, the agency can say, hey, for K through 3, we want you to do, or they can make recommendations to the standards board, and then they make that decision. So these decisions lie within the standards board.
Licensing requirement.
Yeah.
And I believe that ties in continuing education.
Yep, no,
The jurisdiction for that is pretty clear with the standards board. But I believe that AOE intends to make recommendations to them.
I'm feeling okay, but yeah, please go ahead.
I think maybe section 2 is still entitled mandatory completion of literacy modules.
Right.
You might want to change that. It just sounds very.
You're in 303.
Yeah. 6.1.
and I think you would,
Oh, 1 second, what page is that?
Oh, right on the first page.
Well, we're still, right, so we're not mandating modules, we're mandating, we want them to do something. Whether it's the class of Champlain, whatever the agency would recommend the standards board then signs off to, please go ahead.
I was thinking, could it perhaps say literacy professional learning? And then that gives you some flexibility.
Yeah.
So I think the theme is there a way to create some flexibility instead of saying all educators or all licensed educators, that would be broader than, and not being as specific as the literacy modules.
So just maybe completion of literacy professional learning or.
Why don't we just keep broad,
Or just-
say professional development?
Or just literacy professional learning, just that.
Literacy professional learning, but it is mandatory, right? Something is, we're getting everybody up to speed, but then again, there might be people that are already up to speed, is that what you're saying?
There may be,
Okay.
and there may be some people, so I'm imagining,
Yeah.
some of our unified arts, art, music,
Yeah.
physical education, they are working with our students, but they are not teaching one of the core content. They're teaching their content area, which is physical education or something to that extent. They may not need the full,
So literacy professional learning. Boom. Okay, thank you. Anything else, Ms. Carmoli?
This is something that I would say our professional organization, the Vermont curriculum leaders would say, when there are new requirements, and it requires funding, if you're there's a way to, as you're building a new requirement and consider the funding that comes from that. Thank you, that's my.
Yeah, so we are gonna
overarching-
have in this, when we combine them, you will see, 303 will go into 204, and we will attach a position. Position isn't already in there
Okay,
for, full-time.
yes,
It's really basically solidified with the position that's held right now by Ms. Lash.
yes, the project manager.
Yeah, and I think you'll see other literacy things perhaps in other bills, and then other funding. Tell me specifically what you're thinking.
If you were to specify a particular, you do not, but if you were to say that everyone needs to use this particular assessment, you would need, I would recommend that you provide funding for that, if there had to be an adjustment on the ground. In the case of, this is if it was a full 46 hours for all educators, we would have, probably need some release time, some substitute, some sort of dollars back to the school systems in order to provide that. So those are the types of things to.
It's a good point, yeah, it's a really good point.
There's small
We
funding
don't
for
want
the,
people doing it on vacation, frankly. You know, we don't, I mean, we don't want, you know, this is. People are already under a lot of stress and have a big workload. Taking away vacation time to do 46 hours is what we're hoping to figure out.
Substitute teachers are expensive.
and their
And they're hard to
staffing
find.
is
Yeah,
difficult right
that's
now,
true.
finding the substitute teachers. So as you consider adding something in, so an example of that is, and thank you, the Advisory Council of Literacy, if you're considering keeping that in there. Just the funding, so for the small daily rate for the council members, it's a very minimal fee, but it's a nice incentive in recognition. Thank you. Yes,
Thank you. This might be a question for AOE and not you, I'm not sure.
okay.
The modules, the actual modules, does the state of Vermont own those now, or do we? Okay.
So they own them, I believe, for a stretch of time. It's either 4 or 5 years, but I believe what they don't own is the platform. So the funding, in order to deliver the modules, I believe, ends with the ESSER funding. But that is something you would.
Say that last bit again.
The, so the modules, they
Yeah.
are owned for a stretch of time.
Yeah, sort of being
They're-
rented.
Correct,
Yeah.
and there is a platform that they go with, but I believe that the funding for the platform goes away. So there needs to be funding, it's called Pepper, I believe,
Okay,
I don't know the amount, I don't know the cycle of renewal, but I believe that
Okay.
the platform needs to
we
be.
can talk to Ms. Lash about it.
I would like to do that. I'm just concerned tying any kind of requirements to these modules if they're not. You know, if they may not be here in perpetuity for us,
Right,
you know.
I think you've discussed some other ways, some other possibilities
Right,
to retain the professional learning. There are other organizations providing that. There are other state agencies that have professional learning. There are a number of resources on our state agency. So there are other ways. There are courses you could take, both in person or online. Some may have already come with their expertise. They may have a reading specialist endorsement. So there are other ways to receive.
But it still is, I'm glad you raised it, it's still a question. I don't know how this works in other states with other trainings, if this is standard. I mean, we made a big investment.
Yes.
And I guess I thought we own them in a different way, so, okay. Please,
Process question. So at what point do we anticipate combining 303 with 204?
I'm hoping today we might be able to do it if the committee's comfortable with saying, given the amendments, given everything we've talked about, if we have a motion that would put 302, 303 into 204. But I'm not sure if everybody, I mean, that's sort of been that has been our plan all along. And I'm just looking to see if there's any real concern about it.
We wait till tomorrow. I just want to.
Sure, absolutely,
Read all
absolutely.
of these drafts.
And remember, we wouldn't have a vote on the
Right.
final bill
Right.
until Friday, right? Yeah, but yes, Yeah.
A couple weeks ago, we had a question was raised about what to do with, home schools.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that was ever really addressed or if we're just like, not.
It's a good question. Yeah. So we do have them coming in, next or 3:30, but not necessarily on this topic, but we can pull them in a little bit and have a conversation around this because we wanted to make sure that everybody, we don't want, I think it's kids being homeschooled. I don't know the number. Not getting, please.
I did research this a little bit, so homeschoolers do not have the same requirements. They do have a requirement to register their plan or develop their plan. But they do not have requirements to do the same funding, professional learning, or to follow what's outlined by the approved public schools or the public schools are approved independent school. So I don't know how to create that
Yeah,
within this,
we can-
and that's
we can-
up to
yeah,
you,
it's
but I
something that
did
we
the
will work
research
on.
and that is not,
Yeah,
they're not perfect.
and it might be something we have the House do, depending on timing, but if this committee's wants to put in, that's fine too.
Just a curiosity question. How
Yeah.
old is 3Q? Concept. That was it in, like,
I have no idea, I can look it up, I could.
Do you know, Ms. Carmona?
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know the specific year, but it was early nineties, I believe, there were two major publishers that were using that. It sort of came out of, there was some very specific, very tight instruction that was kind of skill-based. It wasn't getting enough on the broad reading and understanding. And so the intention, I believe, is on reading for understanding, but what it missed was how to build some of those skills, those foundational skills that are critical. But I believe that it's the process or those two publishing companies were doing it in the early nineties and forward.
Thank you. Ms. Carmona, are you good for now?
I am, do you have any?
No, if you wouldn't mind sticking around, that would be terrific. I'm going to shift because we have had folks here for a while. But before we do so, Ms. St. James, you were here to walk us through 303 and 284. I also don't want to hold you up. There have been changes to 204 based on the conversation we just had. And there have been at least one change, the title to 303. Do you mind coming back tomorrow with the new clear drafts with changes and edits?
Yes, I think you have them all. I think you have everything. But if you'd like me to come back tomorrow, I'm happy to do that.
So let me just make sure. One note on page 4. So there've been no changes made to S204 and just based on this conversation.
Oh, no,
Thank you. And then 303, the only change is the title on section 2.
correct. But there have been other changes.
Right, I understand that.
Mhm.
And anything else, though, that the committee wants to discuss or raise on these two bills at this point? Otherwise, I think we're going to wait and hear a walkthrough tomorrow, because we do have witnesses who are here in person that I'd like to hear from.
That's fine. You also had me on 2 other bills. Did you still need me on those?
Yeah, so we have you on, 284 and 191. I think we'll do all the walkthroughs tomorrow.
Okay,
We'll
So-
just do some shifts and adjustments. I think you're done
Okay.
for now. And we'll shift to homeschooling and ask, is it Ms. Ratchie?
Yes. hi.
Yes, hi, you want to join us? Hi, good to see you again. Please, come on up. Hope that feels okay. I think we're getting to a good spot. Then you can look them both over.
Yeah.
And then we can just make that motion and get some more testimony. How are you?
Great, how
Yeah,
are
it's good to
you?
see you. We met
Oh,
Were you in Bennington at one point?
yes, it was, see y'all.
That's
Their
right.
Anniversary.
That's right. Yeah, it's nice to see you again.
Good to
Yeah,
see
yeah,
you.
yeah. We'll go around and introduce ourselves, just so you know everyone around the table. Senator Sheep,
We've met, not good to see you again.
It's good to see you.
Hi, Martine. I think we've met in health and welfare. Yes, yeah.
Brian, Bennington County, Senator Weeks.
Dave Weeks, Rowan County. Yes, Terry Williams, Rowan County.
So we have you, thank you for coming in, around homeschooling and educational neglect is the title.
I also have, Nancy Miller here as well.
Nancy, great. So if you want to come up together, is that
Sure.
work? Okay, terrific. As long as you're both comfortable with that, we certainly are. And we are talking. I believe it was Senator Sheep. And then I think there's some concern out there broadly around whether or not we need to make some changes to our homeschooling policy that was altered last year. And I appreciate you coming in and would love to know what you're seeing on the ground, concerns, and floor is yours.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
it's good to see all of you. For the record, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division of DCF. And I have with me Nancy Miller, who is our Child Safety Manager as well. Really, what we want to talk to you about today is the elimination of the supervisory rules around homeschooling and the question of whether educational neglect that may occur because of that absence. And I do want to start by noting that FSD screening criteria and report acceptance guidance, they have not changed following the Agency of Education's updated statute. If there's a report alleging educational neglect and we learn that the child is enrolled in an approved home study program with AOE, we don't accept the report and we don't do any further assessment of the quality of the homeschool education. Our staff, they're not educators. We don't have experience in evaluating curricula. But however, if there is a report alleging educational neglect and we do accept it, and then we discover that the child is enrolled in a home study program through AOE, and we verify this information with AOE, barring any other child abuse or neglect issues, then we close out our CHINSB educational neglect assessment. FSD's understanding of Act 66 of 2023 is that the parent must provide a signed statement that the child's progress in the home study program is being assessed and that the parent must maintain records of the assessments. This can include a standardized assessment administered by the school, a licensed teacher reviewing the student's progress, a portfolio of work, including a summary of learning provided by the parent, or grades from an online school or GED. So FSD, we wouldn't revisit a report about educational neglect unless the school district or AOE made a subsequent report indicating the attestation of academic progress suggested some kind of educational neglect, which would need to include some evidence of negligence. And so that's really the standard that we're working under in terms of we don't necessarily pursue these kinds of issues unless there's an additional evidence of negligence or educational neglect. I will turn it over to Nancy now, who'll talk really more specifics about how we assess educational neglect at FSD.
Great, thank you, Erica, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit initially about statutory authority. So Title 33, Chapters 49 and Chapter 51 grant the Department for Children and Families the authority to conduct assessments regarding the welfare of a child. So the focus of Chapter 49 is on the child abuse and neglect, with definitions of child abuse and neglect defined in 33 VSA 4912. So examples include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional maltreatment, neglect, and risk of harm. The department may also conduct an assessment under the authority of 33 VSA 5106. And the focus of this assessment is on whether a child may be in need of care and supervision. So examples of that include lack of parental capacity, substance exposed newborns, caretaker's behavior suggesting a child may be without proper parental care, and educational neglect. So educational neglect falls under the 5106 as opposed to the 4912. Educational neglect is not, by definition in the state of Vermont, a form of abuse and neglect in chapter 49, but we do have the statutory authority under 5106 to assess it. So it's important to mention though that educational neglect is always assessed in partnership with the school. Our assessments really focus on addressing the barriers to the child attending school and supporting the family in addressing those barriers. Not the education itself that the child is receiving or not receiving. So screening reports and acceptance criteria. A report of educational neglect is considered for acceptance when it is alleged that a parent or a person responsible for a child's care knowingly fails to enroll a child in school or to provide education in accordance with 16 VSA 1121. Through the parents or caretakers' action or inaction, the child is regularly failing to attend school. Educational neglect is considered for children beginning at the age 6 until the completion of 6th grade, where the expectation is that the parent or the caretaker is responsible for getting the child to school, and the parent or caretaker's behaviors have contributed to the child's lack of attendance. The parent is responsible for the child's attendance at a public school, an approved or recognized independent school, or a home study program for the full number of days which that school is held, unless the child is mentally or physically unable to attend, or has completed the 10th grade, or is excused by the superintendent or a majority of the school directors, or is enrolled in and attending post-secondary school, which is approved and accredited in Vermont or another state. Educational neglect is reserved for children age 6 through 6th grade. Or through the end of 6th grade, beginning at grade 7, lack of school attendance for 20 or more days, not due to illness or suspension, is considered truancy, and Family Services Division defers to the school to refer that matter to the local state's attorney to file a truancy petition with the court. Truancy applies to youth from grade 7 up until age 16, who are registered for school and not attending. So when we receive a report about educational neglect at our child protection hotline, we ask the following questions. Is the child or youth registered for school? What is the total number of absences? How does the school measure absences? And what is the parent or guardian's explanation for the absences? How many of the absences were due to medical or psychiatric condition? And has the school verified this with the provider? And what steps have been taken by the school thus far to address school attendance? What communication or attempts at communication with the parents have occurred? And then how have the parents responded to those attempts? We also want to know if the child receives any special accommodations or services that are only delivered through the school, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, etc. Just some data. Going back to 2018, and this data is in the written testimony, which was submitted a couple of weeks ago. The numbers, let's see, so you'll see there's a little bit of a dip in 2019. So in 2018, we accepted 114 assessments. In 2019, we accepted 96, and these are all educational neglect assessments. In 2020, we had 139. In 2021, we had 167. 126. In 2022, we had 126, and then last year we had 150. So we have seen some inconsistency and variations across school districts when receiving reports of educational neglect. So one of those pockets of variation is around how absences are counted and defined. So what is excused versus unexcused, what that means varies depending on the school. So some schools no longer differentiate between excused and unexcused absences, and this varies by district. Some schools will send letters after 5 days or 10 days. I'm sorry, 15 or 20 absences. Some schools will make calls to the parent, in conjunction with the letters. Some schools will make calls to the parent without writing any letters. And some schools employ a home visit as part of their efforts, and the home visit can be conducted by a school principal, a guidance counselor, or a school resource officer. We are noting that there seems to be many schools that no longer have the school resource officer position. Some schools unenroll students after 10 consecutive absences when the reasons for the absence is deemed insufficient. So these differences result in disparity for students across the state, sometimes even within the same county. Some schools make a report to the division before 20 days of unexcused absences, and then others wait far longer for various reasons, including not wanting to damage their relationship with family. So we are hearing in Chittenden County anecdotally that the majority of the educational neglect reports we are receiving are coming from school districts with more people of color, higher rates of poverty, and more housing insecurity or rental housing versus communities with more owned housing. So post-COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen an increase in reports of educational neglect related to children's mental health issues and school refusal. And this results in reports being accepted for educational neglect assessment with a focus on supporting the family to access mental health services, which are generally more difficult to access compared to pre-2020. Yeah, thank you.
So just thinking of the question that I know you all are grappling with is, should the Family Services Division respond to concerns about inadequate home study programs? And I'm thinking about the role of FSD in the area of education. It's important to pause and think about the ultimate goal and ensuring that the state of Vermont is using the right tool for the job. We all want children to receive a quality education within the context of their families, and we want families to have strong connections to their communities and to avoid and to avail themselves of services that are there to help them to meet their basic needs. As a child safety intervention conducted by the Child Protection Agency may not be the best tool to support a family towards those educational goals. We all know there's a perception in the community about what it means to have a family services worker knock on the door. As much as we try to engage families and support prevention efforts towards a child well-being, the reality is that we are the Child Protection Agency. Our involvement is non-voluntary, and it often comes with some apprehension on the part of families. Non-voluntary government intervention is a tool which we really believe should be reserved for matters related to child safety and public safety. Reports of educational neglect detract from the child protection function. Given the division, like many other agencies, is operating with a diminished capacity, we're really focusing our efforts on child safety and fulfilling our mandate to respond to child abuse and neglect. It undermines our ability to keep children safe when our scope of work exceeds our core mission. It's not, and it really shouldn't be, FSD's place to qualitatively evaluate a home study program and to ensure that children meeting age-appropriate educational benchmarks from pre-K to grade 12. Our family services workers don't have the training or background in education to conduct this type of educational assessment. Curriculum development and evaluation is really an extremely specialized skill set, and it is outside of FSD's professional scope. In conclusion, we would wholeheartedly support AOE in having an oversight or enforcement arm to be able to assess the quality of homeschool programs, as well as to address educational neglect. We would also be in support of AOE revisiting their statute to address any unintended consequences that may have come from the home study rule change. And we also really would welcome increased partnerships between DCF, AOE, and DMH, and the mental health designated agencies regarding school absenteeism from children's mental health.
Thank you for this. Thank you both. And I want to apologize for making you both wait so long. I know you're both busy and it's just that time of year, but I do apologize for that.
Nope.
Committee questions or comments? Yes, please, Senator Weeks.
Yeah, a couple questions. First, two about homeschooling specific, and then two about the agency. Yeah, that's right. 2 + 2. Right. So in the concept of educational neglect, how would that be initiated, or has it ever been initiated via DFC and your DCF or Family Services Division?
You mean in terms of homeschooling?
Yeah. Have there ever been any?
I can think of a recent one where it had come up, but since there was an approved home study program, we were not able to open the case. But Nancy, can you think of some where we have, initiated and opened the case?
Not when what we do is we confirm with Agency of Education that the family is enrolled in an accredited homeschooling program. And once we learn that, then we don't go forward with any kind of an assessment.
So is it safe to assume that none of the complaints that are outlined here were related to homeschool?
That's correct.
Okay, that's right.
Those all have to do with absenteeism from schools.
And then specific to Family Services Division, if you were a minor, how complicated is it to raise your hand and say, there's an abusive scenario in my family? How complicated is it?
I think that a lot of times we talk to kids about a trusted adult. So if they are in the school, they can reach out to a counselor, they can reach out to a teacher, and also there is a hotline. So I don't think it's necessarily difficult. I think it's more of the child maybe internally being afraid of the consequences. So not necessarily the mechanism to get to us. I think it's those outside concerns and worries that might keep a child from making the call, which they should make. But Nancy, what would you?
I would just add, there are other venues or vehicles, if you will, for a child to make that outcry, such as to a pediatrician, to a relative, to a neighbor. We sometimes will get reports from the parent of a best friend. That's a vehicle for a child to sometimes ask for help. Certainly schools are one of our larger bodies of mandated reporters, but those other community members and in the medical field are right there as well.
And law enforcement also.
Okay, good. And then do you have any statistics on like how many complaints there are in a year? Yeah. How many accusations of abuse there are, in a year?
Generally
Yeah,
speaking,
just have.
off the top of my head, I think it's about 24,000 was last. I would have to, I can pull it up easily, and we accepted over 400,000 interventions.
24,000
Calls coming into the hotline.
coming into that house.
Let me double check that. I do not have a head for numbers.
No, I
That's
understand.
why I
No,
went
it's-
into
it's fine.
social work.
But 4,000 interventions per year.
She's gonna double check it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Oh, Senator Rashid, please.
Yeah, thank you for the testimony. I think, I would agree that, FSD shouldn't be the part of DCF that's evaluating home study programs, but I think my main concern or question is more so about the interagency collaboration when something like this comes in. Because I know that there can be situations where educational neglect is happening, maybe not as defined here, but kid who's enrolled in a homeschool program but is just not getting homeschooling. But then there's also a parallel complaint of they don't have access to food, they're being physically abused.
Mhm.
And so when that, let's say a distraught family member calls DCF first and, they just lay all this out on the table. Aside from confirming with AOE that they are indeed in the homeschool program, is there any more like information sharing or I guess teamwork, to figure out how or if this kid could be helped?
You want to start?
Sure, I think I heard most of the question, and by the way, it's 19,725 reports in 2022, and I don't have the 2023 data yet.
Do you have an intervention number?
Fall intervention number, 4,526 child safety interventions. You're welcome. So when we are assessing, whether or not to accept a report of neglect, and you're talking about lack of food in the home, or I forget some of the other things that you said.
Physical abuse things, yeah.
Okay, well, so there's different acceptance criteria for neglect versus physical abuse. So with neglect, we would want to know, we would want to hear a little bit about, like, say evidence, because we don't need evidence at the point of report acceptance, but how does the reporter know that the children are not receiving adequate nutrition? Have we received any reports from the pediatrician? Has there been a loss of weight? Is there health conditions stemming from the lack of appropriate nutrition? Or has the reporter been in the home and not seen, has seen like no food for extended lengths of time? We would want to hear some, information in that regard regarding lack of nutrition. With physical injury, we would be looking for observation of injury itself, or a disclosure from a child that they have received an injury. An injury or bruise is not necessarily needed for acceptance. However, like if the child is reporting that they're being, I'm just going to speak bluntly because this is child abuse we're talking about. So if a child is reporting that they're being hit with a belt or something like that on their bare skin, especially a younger child under the age of 6, that's the kind of, we would be looking for specific information. It's really hard. Sometimes we do receive information that may be too ambiguous to accept. It doesn't rise to the level, such as I'm worried that they're not getting nutritional food from a family member. That wouldn't necessarily be enough to open a child safety intervention. We'd be looking for that specific detail.
But I would add though, the family services workers that work the hotline are very skilled, and they do ask questions. There's a give and take. But after a certain point, if there's nothing additional specific, then we wouldn't be able to accept the report. But depending upon what evidence or what information was provided, then we may move to the next steps.
Yes.
That's helpful.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Getting back to education and our, the purview of homeschooling and so on. Did I hear you say, or am I hearing you say that it might be beneficial or helpful to remove the educational neglect from 33 VSA 5106, or am I making that up? Or is it somewhere in between?
I don't recall you saying.
We didn't say that explicitly.
No. Yeah, but it seems as though, I don't know, there's some discomfort or tension.
I think when, thinking back during COVID, during lockdown time, and that's a time when I can really recall our workforce really struggling to maintain the reports of educational neglect, and sort of like, how do we approach this when, seems like the whole world is really struggling with trying to figure out how to educate kids during lockdown. When our folks are, when our district offices are understaffed and they have an educational neglect assessment, what they're really looking to do is, like I said before, just like really partner with the school to address those barriers. They're very different than child abuse and neglect investigations.
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm asking the question, is I just wonder if it's something that would be better housed with AOE, for example, and folks working in education. And it's just a thought that I'm having as we're going through this. Maybe we can.
I think it is a better fit for sure.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Your concluding thoughts are really helpful. Again, full-heartedly supporting AOE, having oversight of enforcement arms, vehicle assess. Supporting AOE revisiting their statute to address any unintended consequences. Certainly what we're concerned that last year, in the move, in the taking steps to streamline and make things easier, there may have been some unintended consequences, and we want to try to, if we can, fix those in our miscellaneous education bill this year. And then the welcome partnership between all of you, AOE and DMH. Senator Sheen's quite a comment about how much interagency breaking down some of these silos, these kinds of situations.
And I do think that that's important because, I mean, we're all here trying to help kids, and if the connection between particularly mental health and absenteeism, that's something that we can get involved in upstream so that the children don't end up having some kind of finding or identity, you know, DCF has to get involved, so much the better to keep the families supported and intact.
If I could just speak one more point to your question about removing from 51 or 53. I think it's really important for folks to understand that what gives the division the authority and any teeth, if you will, in that chapter are Chin's proceedings. And to write an affidavit, bring something to the attention of the court as a response to a child not attending school can sometimes feel like a really heavy-handed instrument for that problem. And that's why we continue to sort of ask, is this really the right tool for the job? Is child protection, the child protection agency, the best agency to address absenteeism and like chronic absenteeism?
Yeah, I just was gonna follow up. I really appreciate you bringing up, you know, in your concluding thoughts, like that what is the role of AOE in oversight and enforcement? Because I think this is a question that we ask ourselves a lot. So I appreciate you bringing it up. I think it's a really important question too.
Frankly, I don't think in my years in this building, we've given really enough attention to the homeschooling, you know, issue, not issue, but in general, talked about homeschooling, what it looks like, what we're doing, what the expectations are. And it comes up here and there, but we really haven't jumped in as much as I would like to. Anything else? Thanks a million. We may have you back in as we kind of find some language, probably during town meeting week, working with folks to, you know, better understand what steps we might take to rectify the problem that may have been created last year.
Well, thank you all.
Thank
Really
you.
good.
Thank you. Great to see you again. Yeah, good to see you. We've met also. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Not very memorable. I hear that all the time. Thanks, everybody. So tomorrow, I see this revised. We've revised Thanksgiving schedule. Doesn't look like we're getting on the floor very long, hopefully not. Beth will come in at 1:30 to talk through 191. Then we're gonna do the walkthrough in new draft of 220 libraries, which I think we're almost there. Attorney General's coming in to talk 120, S-120. If you'd like to come in and talk about Senator Sheen's bill, S-167, miscellaneous amendments to ed. And all these are pretty quick. That will do the walkthrough and markup on S-204 and S-303. Hopefully we'll be able to combine those puppies. 284, and then literacy in independent schools at 430.
Which of those, if any, are you proposing we're going to vote on?
So I think possibly if we're good with it, I think new advancement grants. I think technology we just need to walk through again and have a conversation. I think we will have a vote about combining 204 and 303, which I don't see as controversial. And I think that's it. And then the next day, I'd love to be able to vote that new version of 204, which will have 303 in it, on Friday. And possibly we will also part with, if we haven't parted with 191, we'll part with that, as well as libraries and technology. So, and then when we come back, miscellaneous ed, CTE, and S120. So.